welcome everyone to another filming of the Cannon Falls Area Historical Society, Our Stories, where we tell stories about people's lives that have brought Cannon Falls to where it's at. My name is Steve Dabble. I'm president of the Historical Society, and I have three guests with me who I cherish. Sitting right to my right is Don Hernke, and I got to look at my notes so I don't screw this up. Next to him is Sharon Brown, his sister. Is it Brown? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Nancy Hernke. Steve uses
Correct.
the Hernke name on the far end, and these three are siblings that grew up pretty much working at a restaurant known as the Edgewood restaurant. And we're going to be sharing about this popular restaurant that was located 6 or 7 miles south of Cannon Falls. We were having conversations before we started filming, and there's an argument. I'm going to have to go out and measure now and find out exactly what it was, and I'll email you guys and let you know.
Get it right.
Right, but the idea to film this happened one day when Don and I were talking about who knows what. And Don said to me, you know, Steve, I didn't have a kitchen growing up like most of the kids did. Look at the heads nodding. And I go, what do you mean? And he said, well, we lived in the basement of the restaurant. And I did not know that. I've known a lot about Edgewood, but I did not know that. And why would you build a kitchen in that apartment when you have this full big kitchen up above that served as a restaurant? But Don knows, and I know, and you guys know, I'm sure, is that a lot of family life happens in the kitchen around the table and stuff like that. And Don was just wishing that maybe he missed out on something. Would you say that, Don?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and I realized there must be much more to this than what I know. So let's talk about a restaurant that was 6.5 miles south of Cannon Falls, known as the Edgewood, that was very popular for many years. And so who wants to start talking about the history? We had a little lunch, but I didn't let it go down too far. How did the Edgewood happen to be the Edgewood south of town?
That's a Don, I think.
Well, I can tell you kind of how it began anyway. It began with a passion that my mother had for that serving food to people. And she acquired that in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan when she was a young girl, 17, 18 years old. A neighbor who happened to be my father's sister, asked if she wouldn't come to Michigan to babysit the kids. They had 3 children. Emma was her name, Fred and Emma. And they were going into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to put a gas station in. And then they decided to put a chicken shack in too, about the same time. And they asked Marie to come up and babysit the kids so they could focus on building this log cabin structure. And they lived in a tent while it was being built. Fred and Emma and Marie and the kids lived in a tent. And eventually it did open, and it was, in addition to selling gas, they had a chicken coop out back, and they started then butchering chickens and selling fried chicken. And it grew into a supper club after quite a period of time, and Marie was there for 10 years. And that's where she acquired her passion for the restaurant business and serving food to people in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with Fred and Emma and three little kids. So, you got something to add?
No, but then when they came to Minnesota, they wanted to, my dad wanted to farm.
Yes.
So after, I don't know what year they came, they were in Wisconsin and they moved in 46, I believe, from Wisconsin to Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And his brother, Uncle Alvin, and him shared farming in Goodhue County near Cannon Falls. And then, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these details, my mom just kept this passion of wanting to have a restaurant. So I suppose like all good men, my dad said, sure, I'll build you one. So he did.
Yeah.
With horse-drawn equipment. We have pictures of that, digging the foundation, the basement out, using draft horses, I believe, right?
Yep.
And then they took the lumber off of the property there and used the cherry and et cetera for building the restaurant. So the studs in that restaurant were solid cherry that were milled right there.
Wow, wow. I'm going to come back to that, but I just want to add a piece that I just learned myself, because the thought of serving fried chicken at a gas station, you know, just seems like, what is that? But that's actually how Colonel Sanders got started selling fried chicken at a gas station. And I guess that must have been something that was done more back, years ago. So I'm not as surprised to hear that, although I feel sorry for those chickens growing up behind that gas station. They didn't get far from where they were raised, but I was intrigued by how much construction was done by Otto and the Hernke family. We wouldn't think of doing that today. We would hire a contractor, and there's all the regulations and that type of stuff. But talk a little bit about the building of the restaurant. You dug the hole yourselves. You built the restaurant yourself.
Well, Alvin was my dad's brother, and they were close family members. Alvin had come to Minnesota in, I'd say, the late 30s, early 40s. And his wife was from the Sogan area. Otto stayed on the home farm in
Otto was your
Wisconsin.
dad. Otto was your dad.
My dad. Stayed on the home farm in Wisconsin. But my dad was a private pilot, and every now and then he would fly his airplane to Minnesota and fly back home again, maybe on the same day. But they were close friends, Otto and Alvin. They visited back and forth quite regularly. And my mother, Marie, lived just a few miles from where my dad's home farm was. And as I said earlier, Marie was working in Marquette, Michigan, and that was my dad's sister, was the spouse, or the female in that Michigan affair. So my dad then would go up to Michigan and court Marie a bit. And then they got married in 42, and I was born in 44, and they were then on the home farm in Wisconsin. Marie, of course, wasn't necessarily up to farming. In fact, she grew up in Oklahoma, and one of the things that she hated was picking cotton by hand in the hot sun. That's where she ended up to do most of the cooking in this fatherless family. And the farm, so she wasn't gung-ho on farming, or, oftentimes farm women would clean the milk house and wash the milking machines and tend to
It wasn't mother.
No, tend to those things. So she continued, and she was quite a persuasive woman. That's how she got my dad to get into the restaurant business.
Well, and when they came to Minnesota, then they became turkey farmers,
Right.
which is probably worse than regular farming.
Right.
And so I'm sure the pressure amped up. And I think my mother had she been in a much larger city, she was really kind of, in her own way, very sophisticated.
Yeah, she was cosmopolitan.
Yeah, and I think the fantasy also of a restaurant was more intriguing than turkey farming.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted more than to be a farm wife
That's right.
in the 30s or 40s. Yeah, because that was a defined role.
One of my early foods, I understand from a story, I was a toddler, and they put me out in the turkey yard to be amused, and I would pick things off the ground, as
Sure.
toddlers do. And so had a lot of protein, I guess.
I'm sorry, but ew, that isn't my gum.
And I remember the interiors in particular of the restaurant because, you know, we had 2 horseshoe counters, and then of course there was a candy and cigarette area where the cash register was. And I remember that specifically because one of my jobs on Sunday morning was to straighten the candy and the cigarette. So I took my fair share of candy, no cigarettes, but my fair share of candy in terms of that.
You were the favorite daughter.
Yeah, I was the favorite daughter, yes. And then also, you know, we had that VAT flooring in that checkerboard pattern. The tables with the metal legs, and, you know, drapery with big pattern in it, and then, of course, the cherry paneling. So I'm not sure who their designer was, but it was quite an interior.
But just to go back a bit more, how did the Edgewood come about? It was my mother's encouragement, of course. And Alvin and Otto were always kind of entrepreneurial. And so they decided, well, let's do it. Well, where we're going to put it. There wasn't much question about where to put it because along Highway 52, my dad had pastured cows, young stock, and so on in the woods. And that seemed the most logical place because now that it was partly brushed out, the cows had eaten up a lot of the vegetation around there, and there was only the big trees left, so they decided, let's put it there along Highway 52. And so they started. And it is true that Otto and Alvin had 5 stout boys, farm boys, and he still had a team of horses left from the 30s and 40s or thereabout, you know, and they used those horses to haul manure, just more for fun than for practicality. But the boys and the horses came over, and these walk-behind hand scrapers that 2 horses pulled, you'd lift up on the handles and it would scoop out dirt. That's how they dug the basement of that restaurant. And then my dad, of course, continued with some acquaintances in Cannon Falls, and he knew a block mason there. And so they asked him to come up and stay and do the block work. And they housed him in a Model T truck that they had put a
I didn't know this.
wood structure on, and they used this wood structure in the turkey yards out in the field to keep the owls and the foxes and whatnot. They'd sleep overnight in this wood structure, and then it became sort of one of the first RVs, I would say, in the county. And it became the lodging spot for the carpenter mason that came.
Lodging included.
Yeah, came from Wisconsin.
Well, on the construction side, you know, I was intrigued as I did my research how involved Otto was, and then and all the things, and so I can mention sawmill.
Yeah.
I found that. But is that sawmill that is out there right now the sawmill that Otto and Alvin had?
No.
Okay, but because there's a sawmill right next to the.
Yeah, they did. They had their own sawmill basically in the same area where I live right now, where the house is in that area back there is where the sawmill is. And my dad still had that sawmill up even in the 70s when he was growing ginseng and making cover for ginseng.
Yeah.
Oh, ginseng! I forgot about that one. So I ran across some that I I'd forgotten, but Deer Park. You know, we'll get to the restaurant, folks, but there was all this other stuff that went on. You know, Otto built a motel.
Yeah.
With little separate cabin type rooms.
10 units.
10 units, and there was a deer park, and I remember when there was a mink farm out behind there, and whatnot. I don't know, you know, raised and butchered hogs, you know.
Yeah.
He built a snowmobile for us. It was more like a tank, but
Yeah.
So I'm going to move along because I don't know how many people know. We're here about the restaurant, but the story behind it is really important. But Marie wanted to have the restaurant, and Otto did all that he could within his means, and so they cut their own wood and use the sawmill to do it and make it work. And you would never know that by looking at the building. So Otto had that gift. Now I know where Don, who volunteers at the museum, gets his gift of working with his hands and stuff. But the part that I remember about studying the restaurant side of Edgewood that opened up is a phrase that was really how it operated and how I remember it, but a brochure stated that they serve fine homemade food in a comfortable and scenic setting. And that really does say it, because I realized that food out there was more like homemade food, than it was what you'd get in a restaurant fare and stuff like that. And so Marie had this in every cell in her body to serve people and cook. So let's talk a little bit about Marie and the kitchen at the restaurant. You guys work in the kitchen at all or not?
Oh, yes.
There's another element that needs to be included here, and that was that Elvin and Otto were partners, and Marie and Aunt Ida,
Both were.
Elvin's wife, was also involved in the restaurant and the cooking, and that was an interesting.
They were quite different personalities.
Yeah, quite different personalities they were, and they were good friends. And continued to be good friends, but they could never agree on how much salt to put in the soup, or whether or not it should be medium or medium rare. And so there was always just a little bit of conflict. And then it would bother Marie when Ida was at the restaurant. Her team of 5 stout boys would always come to the restaurant and eat 2 turkey dinners instead of just one, and that would bother Marie a little bit. And so they were able to talk their way through it as partners, and it was decided that Elvin would take Otto's farm, and in turn Otto would take possession of the restaurant. And that's how the partnership was agreed upon and split up.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
They remained good friends for all of their life, traveled to Florida together and so on. But it's quite an interesting situation.
Well, homemade was, my mother demanded everything be from scratch. There were no shortcuts. All the way from pie crust to fillings to soup ingredients, all those kind of things. And she also had really specific ways of where and how it was done. And her equipment was her equipment. She used to post jillions of signs, don't touch my knives and all that kind of thing. And I, being the youngest, had a lot of involvement in terms of the food, all the way from poking pie crust, which, like when you par bake a single shell, you have to have holes in it so it doesn't get bubbles. So that was my Saturday job, and she was very clear about, down to details of, okay, you put them in individually and don't stack them until they're really cold. And so that was kind of my Saturday mornings, at least in terms of life for a long time. And, we used to get up on she had a very strange thing. I don't know why we couldn't cook, like, for instance, in lemon pie and coconut cream pie and all that. She was adamant that it be cooked beforehand and cooled before put in. But instead of cooking it on Saturday, we would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning, and cook it and do some other things in terms of prep. And then we'd go back to bed around 5 until 7, and then we'd get up and finish the pies. So
So folks, you get up at 2. Okay. go back to bed at 5 and then get back up again. That was life in with a mother named Marie.
Yes, and you know, like, if the health people would have come along, they probably wouldn't have agreed with the uniform I wore, because at that point in time, I mean, in summer, I'd wear my shorty pajamas doing all these tasks. So it did have some freedom at 2 o'clock in the morning of how you approached it.
I read something somewhere that the state people that came by to regulate were more concerned about Marie's health than they were about whether there was something going on with the food that wasn't right.
Right.
Because, and there was an article about the people that were coming around trying to sell pre-put together pie fillings or
Oh,
pre-this or
never.
pre-that. And there was no traction
No
with Marie.
traction.
No.
Yeah.
And she was really, also, I will give her really credit, she was committed to her vendors. You know, she relied on them heavily. You know, like there used to be an Armor Meat Man. And every,
Oh, yeah.
you know, Monday or whatever, he would come at 10 o'clock and take the order. So it was a very personal kind of connection. And she was committed to those vendors. Someone else might have been slightly cheaper, but she understood the value of those long-term relationships and the reciprocality that that brought. So I think that served the restaurant well.
That was brought out
throughout
in
the
a
years.
discussion about the employees' love for her. She, everybody had to work hard,
Yeah.
but she treated them so well, and everybody that worked there felt that they were really lucky to be working there.
She would for the people that work there, and I don't know how long it lasted or whatever, but she would at Christmas go out and buy each individual a gift that she selected specifically for them. And they were really lovely, lovely gifts. Of course, she loved shopping as well. But she did, I think, understand the value of vendors. And then also, you know, we had many people there that worked for 30 years. And while I think on a daily basis she didn't necessarily always say thank you to them, I think that there was an understanding that they felt valued because of their knowledge and their commitment as well.
Yeah, if you had a death in the family or a marriage or a graduation or whatever, I mean, you know, nowadays employers will, you know, give you a $25 Cub coupon or something, or even maybe the ham, but oh no, she would cook the entire ham dinner, wrap it all up, and hand deliver it to that home. So you can see why those employees were endeared. It was more like having a very large family. So yeah, they were loyal. I mean, it was just a different time.
So go back. Go ahead.
No, and she was pretty firm with people and employees. I mean,
Yeah, was her
there was a
was
way
her the
of-
German side? I think,
Yeah,
yeah.
could be.
Just thought I'd mention. Yeah.
But and no one ever quit because that I know of because of her firmness or her demand to perform in a certain way. They stayed because I think they just really respected her commitment.
And she was the quality person there.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
She was the quality person. You know, my dad, in terms of personality, was just much more laid back, and you know, the concept of like me.
That's how I remember.
That's what my dad was. And so my mother was the taskmaster in terms of it, but it was always fair because it wasn't singled out for anyone. But she was the quality person
Absolutely.
in terms of keeping that business going.
So go back to the pies, because the pies are a big thing with the Edgewood history. And did Marie develop those recipes that were unique to those pies?
You know,
What
I
do you
don't
think?
know that
You know,
answer.
the Betty Crocker cookbook got a lot of use. I think that might have started as an inspiration. Looking at
And
recipes,
she
loved food
loved
magazines.
cookbooks. Oh my
Yep,
God.
cookbooks.
You know, at her
food
funeral,
magazines.
we gave away cookbooks because she loved. I mean, she would look at cookbooks like other people read books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right, Donna. She might have
Listen.
taken an inspiration, and then there was always a little bit of her that wanted to make it better or more interesting, or oh, let's try this kind of thing. You know, I think she always mourned a little bit when something became really popular that she had to keep repeating over and over, like a peanut delight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she probably thought, if I have to make one more of those peanut delights again. But I think you're right, is she took inspiration and kind of went from there.
When Don donated some stuff from the Edgewood to the Historical Society, and we had just acquired the White House next to the museum, and Zach decided he wanted to name the kitchen in that house as the Marie Hernke kitchen, and we had a Edgewood Day or a Marie Hernke Day. I don't remember what it was because it was Zach's invention, but Zach's mother made a bunch of lemon meringue pies. And the craziest thing happened when I took my first bite of that. I went in a time machine right back to 1964, 65, 66. And I was a teenager or younger at that time. But that I've never had that flavor. It just took me right back, and that was spooky and fun, you know, all at the same time.
A great pie story is, I mean, you know, how many thousands of pies did she make throughout her life? But it was her 90th birthday, and we had decided to have an open house.
And she was retired.
She was retired, and this was just her residential stove. And so the idea was we were going to all come on Saturday and make these pies because we were going to just serve pie and coffee. So we get there and 60 pies are made. You know, and
Times
well,
7. How many
yeah.
pieces of pies are that?
420.
Yeah.
And we said, first of all, Mother, boy, you have big feelings about who loves you and is going to come to this open house. But, you know, the stamina and that commitment to doing that and the pride. She did it for her sense of pride and what she was known for. And she loved also, like at church auctions, you know, if her lemon meringue pie would go for $60. Oh my God, that was so
Rewarding.
valuable to her.
Interesting. So the Edgewood restaurant grew and was successful. Some of that from the local community. Some of it I was reading had to do with people traveling north from Iowa. They would make sure that they timed their drives so that they would be able to eat at the Edgewood. So one of the things I read is that the restaurant won an award, or no, didn't win an award, but it was in the top 5% in gross revenue of restaurants in the state of Minnesota. I read that. That's amazing because it's like out in the country. It's not in a town. It's not in a larger town. It was in Cannon Falls at that time, maybe 1,500 to 2,000 people. So where did all that business come from?
Well, a lot of it was promotion of special events, recurring kinds of things. It might have been lutefisk in the fall, an old-fashioned Christmas celebration around Christmas, garage sale in the spring, Western outdoor barbecue in a tent, and so on. But all of those things were promotional things. We had a mailing list of people that received a flyer. I had Vicki Ashford for a number of years was sort of my salesperson. She worked the banquets and parties and the special events. Part of her task was to drum up catering business as well as banquet business at the restaurant. She would keep a log, a calendar of events, or a calendar of activities for various groups, and a month or two after, she would call and ask how did it go? Was the food good? Was the service good? And so on. And then she'd follow up 6, 8 months later and say, okay, in February, you had the Valentine's gathering for all of the Lions' wives. You know, we've got an opening on the February 10th, a Saturday night. Would you like to book it again this year? And all of that certainly helped. She was paid a salary as well as a commission, and she did quite well with it.
Well, I do know South Cannon Falls,
Yeah.
you have the Swedish heritage on the east side of Highway 52 and the Norwegians on the left side.
That's right.
And in the early days, folks, if someone from the east side of 52 married somebody from the west side of 52, there was a problem, okay? 'Cause it was really fun learning that one. But both Norwegians and Swedes love lutefisk.
Yeah.
And it must have been good out there. I'm not a lutefisk eater, but you must have made it the right way, because you would stack the house with that.
You know, when we were at our peak as far as lutefisk is concerned, we'd serve 400 pounds in a night. 400 pounds of lutefisk in a.
How many meals would 400
Well,
pounds?
you had to kind of figure about a pound per person, because the lutefisk was. They ate
Slipped
a lot.
off the plate.
Yeah, we should tell a story about Bai. Bai was a lady that worked there for years and years and
Bye,
years.
Kwame.
Yep.
And she came back in the kitchen just in stitches.
And
Just
Vi would
laughing
always cry when she left, you know?
So she was waiting on tables out there.
Well, and first of all, people for the lutefisk dinner would wait hours to
In
get
line,
in.
in line.
Right,
In line.
Yes,
right. It was a buffet.
It
So
was a
once
buffet.
they got there, they were committed to eating. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
And
Doug.
we would set the tables up banquet style because we could get more people,
More people,
in.
yes.
Okay, so
More seats on the chairs.
there were, you know,
Well,
rows of tables that with aisles in between and chairs, and some of these big guys would come in with pretty good sized stomachs, you know, and they'd have their plate of lutefisk, and one fellow was portly, and he was carrying his lutefisk plate and he pulling in his stomach so he didn't
Inhaled.
bump into the next person and his pants fell down.
Straight to the ground.
This is the
In
truth.
line at the buffet.
So Vi's
No,
there.
no, this
and-
is getting to his table.
Oh,
is
getting to
getting-
to
yeah.
get to the table. Okay.
Yeah, so he set his plate down at the table
Sure.
next to him, pulled up his pants, and kept on
Everything
going.
was fine.
Didn't even blink. I don't know if he was a Norwegian or a Swede. I don't know. That
He certainly
what-
wasn't a
that's what-
German.
No, he wasn't a German.
That put Vi in tears,
Oh.
laughing tears.
Yeah.
Well, I've never eaten lutefisk, and I probably never will, but I do remember the Swedish meatballs were
Yeah.
Yeah, from
well
scratch.
appreciated out there and stuff too, and so you had that going for you. I thought maybe the Christmas celebrations were more of your invention, Don, once you owned the restaurant.
Oh, that's true. In
It
fact, Nancy started that.
Well, it started with some ideas of maybe we should have some kind of festival. And the big thing that I probably contributed is we said, well, there's got to be some program or something. And I was going to Augsburg at the time, and then my roommate was in the choir. And so it was, it kind of evolved from there. And then, you know, of course, the menu Mother took, you know, care of, and the entertainment Don took care of. But it was, I'll never forget that very first one. Mother was beyond whatever, because while we had served, you know, lots of people, you know, in quantity kind of thing, it was a different format, and you know, it had to be timed because I can't remember how many we did a day,
Seatings,
four
yeah,
or
four
something like that. But
seatings.
it was a lot of food and a lot of cleanup in, you know, a you know, very choreographed time. But I had a company after I graduated from college, and we decided to bring our clients and their families to it. And it's something still to this day that I run into someone and they'll talk about how much that meant to their kids and to their family. So it was a really important, and people for that event came
Oh.
year after year.
Oh, from the Twin Cities, from Rochester.
I'm not
from
letting
Iowa.
Don see this. I want you girls to see this first, and this picture will be on the
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
on the deal.
Yep, no, I remember
Yeah.
those
And
distinctly.
this is what I remember.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Don was excellent in that role.
Yeah.
Really
did such a good
excellent
job.
in
And
that role.
and if you see the ladies dressed in like apparel and the two gentlemen there, I'm assuming those would have been the singers from Augsburg. Do you think?
Well,
No?
This might have been
Mankato, I
later.
think.
Yeah, this might have been
Oh.
later because it was first Augsburg and then moved to Mankato.
Al Wortman was the music director, choral director in Mankato. And when the Ella Street Singers, no, what was the name of your group at Augsburg?
I can't remember.
Probably just the Augsburg
Anyway,
Choir.
They put on the entertainment, the Christmas entertainment, maybe for the first 3-4 years. And then, I don't know why or how, but for some reason they were unable to come, and we were looking for some other people. And talked to this fellow Al Wortman from Mankato. And he had a group called the Ella Street Singers.
Oh.
And it was about anywhere from 15 to 25 instrumentalists and vocalists. And they stay in the motel. And the most shows, they did this for like 25 years, 20 years anyway.
Wow.
At least 20 years. He kept not the same Ella Street Singers, but the same group.
Sure.
The year, and these shows would come off at we'd do a show 11, 2, 5, and 8 o'clock on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And we did, one year we did 25 shows. 25 shows, and at each show there was somewhere between 120 and the most we could do was about 150 people. Tickets were sold in advance.
Per show.
Tickets were sold in advance. Senior groups would come by buses. They primarily were the primary customers for the midday affairs, the 11 and the 2 o'clock, and families would be the weekend and the evening crowd.
What years did you do this? Because I can just barely grab on a memory of sitting through a couple of the productions, but not
Probably
much.
starting in about 1970.
Well, then that was through about 1999. That's when I sold it.
Okay.
And then the owner, the fellow that I bought it from, he did it 1 year too. So from 1970,
30 years,
almost 30
basically.
years.
And you had a fire outside with a tripod, and you did chestnuts, or
And
Hot
cider.
apple cider.
and cider, and
And hay rides through the woods.
Yep.
And there were-
cross-country ski paths eventually
Right.
too.
Yeah.
I mean, you would tap into whatever was sort of a thing. I mean, there was a
And-
time when cross-country skiing was much bigger than it is now.
Yeah.
So.
And there were characters, all
Yeah.
kinds of
Yeah.
Disney characters and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was a great thing for
Costuming was
kids.
a part of it.
Don's first wife, Mary Drometer, was an excellent seamstress, and she would make costumes. They rented costumes
Yeah,
also.
we
The
rented.
whole staff wore costumes, but I remember the amazing things that she had sewn for Philip and Hillary during the early years.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to open one of those restaurants again and do this again?
Never, never.
I'm
never.
jealous that I didn't.
Nope.
I can't remember more of that part of it.
In fact, in my immaturity, I had such a negative feeling about, the hard work and what I thought was missing out on parenting and whatever, that I just told myself, I remember at age 12 sitting in the woods and going, never going to marry someone who has their own business, ever. Well, what happens? You marry an entrepreneur, you do the same
Well,
thing.
and also, though, it changed things about the idea of parenting for you. You were
Oh, right.
at-home mother.
Oh, and absolutely, at that age, I can remember pre-adolescence saying, I will not work as a mother. I will be a mother, and then when I'm done with that, and that's exactly what I did. and it was an immaturity on my part, but I think it was based on sort of how I felt traumatized because I was so different. My upbringing was so different than all my classmates.
Yeah.
I loved when my classmate would, one of the girls would say, "Oh, you want to come over and you know, have we call them pajama parties." And I thought, yeah, and I'll get a real meal at a real table with a real family, and a mom and dad will sit
In
down.
a regular type kitchen.
In
No,
a regular
I
kitchen.
looked at it totally
Right.
the opposite.
We're totally
'Cause
different.
I'm 4 years younger, and
Yeah.
really, I stayed with my grandmother and my uncle probably from the age of 2, because that was when the restaurant was built, until like 6-ish. The primary amount of time I stayed with them, and that was really great for me because I would have gotten lost in the busyness otherwise. But when I came and was at the restaurant principally, I all of a sudden had this bigger family of all these people that work there. And then also customers
Right.
really became my friends.
I
I mean,
remember you.
I would,
Ladies in Rochester.
the Ridgeway
Ridgeway.
Oh, yeah.
sisters.
Tell a story.
So anyway, because we didn't have a family table, I didn't want to eat in the kitchen alone. So I'd go out into the dining room and introduce myself and ask if I could eat with people. And
I love it. I love
And
it.
He's the extrovert,
I was-
obviously.
I understand why.
I was cute and chubby and
Oh.
had those locks and
Oh,
whatever.
curls.
And so I never got turned down. And so I developed these relationships with these people, and I learned it was very good for me because I learned those social skills
Right.
and how they can help you. I also learned what you could say and not say at tables. For instance, like we could eat anything we want, but you couldn't order, for instance, as kids, we couldn't order a full steak, but we could have what we said were scraps, you know,
Yeah, I
because my dad would trim, you know, because he bought the
Sure.
half cows or whatever, and, you know, there'd always be steak ends, and we could have that. Well, I learned quickly that when I sat with guests, I wasn't to order the scraps. And you know, these two sisters from Rochester would come and always bring me things. And of course, like in Kids Zeal, I would want them to hurry up and eat because I wouldn't get the thing until we were back out at the car. So it was a great way for me to grow up. And also, my dad was incredibly influential in terms of teaching me. He said, you know, Nancy, you can set your salary at every single table. And that was an incredible eye-opening thing for me of yes, you can. And of course, you know, when the concept of shared tips came out, I said,
Yeah.
not going there because
Right.
I knew that I could set my salary.
Yes.
So there were great things that
Yeah,
happened
so
for me.
explain, I understand, but in case somebody misses that'll be watching this, by setting your salary, it means developing larger tips by how well I took care of people.
Right.
Absolutely.
Changed your salary, yes.
Right.
Enhancing their experience.
Right.
Yes.
Having a relationship with them.
Having a relationship,
Right.
making, you know, not only food, but the experience of the service person important. Not that you became part of their party, but rather that you very carefully crafted the intervention, that all of a sudden their water glass was filled and they didn't even have to ask, or that the coffee was filled, or quietly you asked if they wanted another cocktail without interrupting. And those were great things for me to learn in doing my own business.
I call it, and I was always attracted to the hospitality business, but the deal is seeing their need before they even know they need it.
Right.
Is what it is. But I think now, I've known that every time I got interested in going to the hospitality business, I'd stop cold because I had this knowledge that you worked harder on Mother's Day, you worked harder on Easter, you worked harder around, you worked harder at the times when people are all out having fun.
Celebrating.
And I'm beginning to think now that all came from observing the Edgewood, because I don't know what other restaurant I was that close to at that time. Mind you, I was young, you know, and these are just, you know, proto-adult thoughts.
Oh,
up
Mother's
there.
Day. You know, we'd say, okay, when can we celebrate Mother's Day? How about Thursday following Mother's Day? No, we have a big reservation for 80 that night. We can't. How about, you know, and we go through these iterations, and finally, you know, you really celebrated it sometime in the future, or you just didn't get to.
But for that, what you said were all these relationships, and my family had a business, and I ended up describing them as all family. All of my
Right.
clients are my family, and I was rich with
With
acquaintances,
fam-
just
right,
rich.
right.
You know.
Oh, yeah.
The downside of that now is that they're all disappearing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and it really, our staff, you know, it wasn't that I didn't have a mother. Like Nancy said, we had a half a dozen mothers. Those women were so caretaking. I mean, they were always watching out for us kids.
Well, Sharon and I even,
yeah.
Lucille Nelson, as Don mentioned Harrison Lucille before, you know, was an incredible woman because, for instance, you know, we didn't have typical things like homemade bread or store-bought cookies. So Sharon and I would go across, they lived right across the highway. We'd go right across the highway and steal cookies.
Oreo cookies,
Or, you
because
know-
we didn't have any store-bought cookies.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, and who wanted homemade cookies? Not
yeah,
me.
And, you know, I'm sure Lucille knew
Oh, she planted
all
them.
the time, but you know,
She planted 'em.
She was a good mother and said it's all right, you know.
Well, and I remember one time, must have been like junior high, and we had gym in those days as opposed to in elementary school, and you know, you knew you had to have clean underwear to go for gym, and I didn't have any, so I was, you know, looking at this washing machine down in by our basement apartment. I had no clue what to do, and one of the cooks, Millie, came along and she said, "What's the matter, Sharon?" I said, "I gotta have some clean undies for tomorrow," and she said, "Let me show you how." And so we threw my undies and the kitchen dish towels together, and you know, so there she was, just when I needed her. And so I really didn't suffer. I just had it
Yeah.
in my brain.
Well,
that
it's
I
just
did.
how it's
Yeah, it's how you view it at a certain age. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, I'm enjoying where this discussion has gone. I just wanted to. What was here that I was looking for that I was going to?
You know, let me tell a story about Harris Nelson. Harris and Lucille, as you know, are neighbors. And Harris always kind of pictured himself as a ladies' man. You know, he was always hanging around with women and whatnot. And
After Lucille died.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, even before.
Well, no, he'd
Oh.
hang around.
He'd hang around.
Okay, well, I
And-
just don't want to
and
diss
so-
Harris. I liked Harris.
So he would come over and to the,
Oh, yeah.
because they were only a half a block away, come over to the Edgewood, over to the restaurant, come in the back door. And he knew where the coffee machine was, and so he'd get himself a cup of coffee, and then he'd sit and poke pie crusts for Marie for an hour or so, you know, and they'd talk and so on and so on. And sometimes she'd get sick of him, and sometimes she probably enjoyed his company. And then finally we got a liquor license at one point, and then Harris, in addition to coffee, he'd walk behind the bar and grab the
Oh, help
brandy,
himself. Yeah.
grab the brandy bottle, he'd put a little brandy in his coffee and go back and talk some more.
He could talk longer then.
He was an interesting fellow, Harris was. He had a filling station across the street, a Sinclair station, and then he sold poultry, raised chickens and sold chickens, and he really never had a job, but Lucille probably provided most of the.
As a
most-
waitress. Well, after teaching school. as you
Yeah. Anyway, he just was an interesting neighbor.
He didn't just raise chickens. I remember he tried to domesticate foxes and
Yeah,
skunks.
yes.
And then he had mink, just like my dad
Yeah,
did.
he had mink. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, and also like in terms of longevity and people being committed, security was an interesting thing at the restaurant. Because you would think like, okay, an owner comes in and locks up and all that kind of thing. Oh no, the deal is if you were the last person at the restaurant, you would just push that little button on the back of the doorknob and pull it shut. and that was locking up. Well, our neighbor, Sharon
Banker.
Banker, one night got her uniform stuck in the door when she locked it.
Oh no.
And of course, you know, she struggled and could not get it out. And so she finally thought,
Bag it.
I'm taking my uniform off. She could take it off, and she just left it in the door.
And
And-
these weren't pants and tops.
No,
In
this
those
was a
days,
full
we
uniform.
Wore dresses.
Yeah.
Yes.
White dresses.
Okay, I have
So-
a picture of that now.
So anyway, my dad the next morning came to work and said, boy, this business is changing.
Oh, that's a great story. I was looking for a piece of detail here, and I don't remember it, but at one point, you got to the number of employees approached 40 or went over 40 full-time employees in
No,
the
they were full
wintertime,
and part-time.
or in the summertime, and winter 25, but that's a lot of families that are earning money off of that restaurant and stuff, you know. and So
Yep.
this is the tough question. I hate to even ask it a little bit because I sort of know, but why don't we have a place like that today in Canada?
Yeah, well, that's a question that many people ask of me, and all I can tell you is my opinion is that in order to keep, first of all, why did I sell it? All right, I was approached by a good realtor salesman, and says that I think I can find a buyer for your property, and I said, well, I don't know, not really too interested, but then he did come back with a buyer that was able to obtain financing. And Mary and I had been at it for almost 30 years, and it was always harder for me to keep coming up with new ideas, new promotions, keep the old ones going. I felt somewhat at a loss sometimes of how I'm going to keep this business
Fresh.
moving
Yep.
in
New
the right
ideas, yep.
direction, you know. So Mary and I, we decided to sell it. And the fellow that bought it hadn't been in the food business. It just was his dream to get into that business. So he and his family moved into the house that we occupied at the end of the motel. And that business really took up a good share of your family time. And that began to be a point of difference between mom and the kids and dad being at the restaurant all of the time, you know, having to be there, feeling to be there. And it became a little bit overwhelming for them. And a few of the things began to sort of change in a way that wasn't necessarily positive. And of course, he had a good amount of debt to take care of through the local bank and Small Business Administration, and the volume had to remain up there close to that $1 million mark in order to keep the place open. And about 3 years after or so, it was foreclosed on by the bank and the SBA, and another party bought it from Northfield and had a similar experience, and then it was sold at auction, the building alone, and the fellow that went to the auction, they couldn't get any bids. I wasn't there, but he told me the story. He couldn't get any bids, and he thought that, well, he apparently had a little extra money, and so he held up his fingers too. Okay, $200,000. They wouldn't sell for that, but the banker and the guys from the FBA knew they had somebody with interest, and so they, after the auction, got him in the back room and worked him over a little bit. and
Negotiated, Don.
Yeah,
It's called negotiated.
Negotiated, yeah. And they ended up coming to some kind of a purchase agreement. And he never did open the restaurant. He tried to lease it out a couple of times, but it never really had the, never really had the buzz anymore.
Yeah. Well, but and some things have changed too. Supper clubs aren't doing well.
That's
Yeah,
right.
sports
Well, you
bars,
just
yeah.
go along Highway 52, you know. There's the Edgewood, there's one up at Hampton, you know, and there are few of the supper club type restaurants open.
And I think it's simple. I think that families aren't willing to change lives like it changed ours.
Right.
And in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there were so many food purchase options, convenience stores opened, you know.
Yep.
You could go in and get about, I'd say probably, I don't know for sure, but I'll bet you 50 to 70% of all the breakfasts sold are coming out of a convenience store anymore, you know. Same way with lunches. So all of that, it's a changed business.
The speeding up of life hasn't left time to be able to go to a restaurant and have breakfast anymore. And, and it's good, bad, and different. It just is that way.
It is. Yeah.
Well, and also it was clear in our family. I mean, my dad always said if you stay in bed past 6 o'clock, you're sleeping with the devil.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know,
Oh,
work,
yeah.
if you work, you're good, and if you
Right.
don't work, you're not good.
Right.
So
It's
the
your
message
identity.
was really clear to us
Right.
about,
That must be a German message because I'm typically up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock because the day is, I'm wasting the day. You know, I got to get
oh, my
going.
dad said those were stolen times of when you were up and most of the world wasn't. And I still probably agree with him
Yeah.
to this day. I
I
get
do.
irritated when my husband gets up sooner than he should because then my paper time and all that kind of thing is
Yes, I know.
interrupted.
We'll talk about that after we get off the camera here in a second. But I'm going to bring this to a close. I have really enjoyed this walk through Cannon Falls history and your lives, and I hope that people out there that watch this video will have enjoyed it as much as we have. I've enjoyed researching this and getting it ready for the interview. This is brought to you by the Cannon Falls Historical Society, where we want to capture these stories before we disappear, you know. I hate to say it that way, but I'm the same age as these folks here, folks, so I get the disappear thing, but I wanted to close a little bit with something that came out in a lot of the stuff I researched is a sort of a quote from Marie, whether I paraphrase it or not, but I just wanted to serve people.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I'm getting choked up now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just wanted to serve people.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to do something. Luke, can I have you take off your headset and go bring in my surprise? You may take 2 trips. I enjoy serving people. Too. I have all my life. And I want the this on camera when he brings this out. But
Wonderful.
I just
Oh,
my
wow.
gosh.
My, oh my, lemon
Lemon
pie.
pie.
yeah,
Wow.
but it's your mother's recipe.
Oh, terrific.
Wow.
Now it probably
Look
isn't
at
as
that.
good as your mother made it.
That crust. So who made this?
My wife.
Oh, how sweet.
And what
Yeah,
what
very
what she
sweet.
figured out.
Thank you.
Now, what the folks at home don't know is Marie's lemon meringue pie had meringue that was about this thick.
Right.
Okay. And thank you, Luke. And my wife told me that she figured that she doubled the meringue recipe.
And she had a stabilizer, correct,
Yeah.
Don? There's something called a stabilizer that, and she had
So-
a KitchenAid that would whip it, and you add that stabilizer, and that's how you got that height.
Is it close?
It's
Oh,
good.
the filling is
Darn
wonderful.
good. Crust is good.
Yep.
Thank you. That was just lovely.
Yeah.
I,
It sure
I
was.
could not bring this out. You know.
And this experience for us was great too because I learned things that I didn't know.
Right, you always do.
So
Yeah,
thank
I
you
do.
for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yes.
interesting how your path through living in the restaurant differed a little bit from your siblings. You
Oh,
know?
of course.
I get a kick out of it.
Don't you find that true when you talk with those
Yeah.
you grew up with?
I'm just thinking if I'm sitting there with my family, and the owner's daughter comes sneaking out from behind in the kitchen and wants to join us at the table. It's just awesome. How wonderful. I feel special and honored, and that's how we are. But you made that work for you.
My mother was aghast one day, and I solicited a lot of help from a lot of people in terms of that time. And we had a great black lab, of course, named Pal.
Pal.
Well,
And Pal liked to go through the woods and all that kind of thing. And he had wood ticks on him. And they had gotten bigger.
Yeah, they do get bigger.
And anyway, of course, Mom and Dad were both really busy, so they couldn't do it. So a gentleman pulled up in front, and I was sitting out front on the sidewalk with Pal. And I said, well, would you help me? And he said, well, sure. So he helped me get off all the wood ticks.
Oh.
And then, of course, I had to bring him around through the back door because he had to wash up after doing that. And, of course, it was perfectly clear from my mother that was exceeding the bounds of what you would ask a customer to do.
I hope he got a free piece of lemon pie.
He
Yeah.
probably got a whole free meal.
Yeah. Well,
So-
thank your wife.
I will
Good
do that.
job. I'm
Yeah, it
very
is.
impressed with the crust. It's amazing.
She's a good cook, but
Yeah.
but she was intimidated by having to try to recreate something in the memory of Marie.
Well, it was
Well, there
really.
is a little cookbook.
right?
That's-
But
Did she not have that?
we had the pamphlet that was done.
The
in
pamphlet.
Yeah,
That's,
the
Okay.
pamphlet.
that's what I meant.
But so I found out that after 40 years of marriage or so, I can't do the math fast enough sitting here, that my wife has the recipe for German pepper nuts that my mother used to make.
oh,
I don't know what that is.
It's a little cookie, okay,
it's a
but
cookie.
it's a big deal for me and not hardly anybody else.
Pfeffernuss.
What? Pfeffernuts.
Pfeffernuss.
Pfeffernuss, yep. And so this year I told her I want to make them now that I know you got the recipe. But what happens with a lot of cooks, I found out, is that when it comes to some of the little stuff, you just put a little bit of this and a little bit of this on it. It didn't say how much. So we're experimenting.
You're learning.
Yeah, it didn't quite, it got close, but not exactly there. But why wouldn't you say a half a tablespoon for this recipe or something? But you do it so much. Marie must have done this so much. She
Oh, yeah.
hardly knew how much was going in other than by just doing it. It's automatic.
Did she didn't use measuring cups, did she? Or did she?
she
You
did.
cooked
Yeah.
with her.
Yep, she
did.
did.
Oh, she did. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it was
Pie, when she made pie crust, she didn't.
didn't. That was by
Um,
feel.
That was by feel.
And was it lard?
it was lard.
It was lard. Yep.
She made lard crust.
yeah.
Yes, of
Another
course.
astounding thing. Aunt Dorothy and Marie would, this for our old-fashioned Christmas celebration, they'd make 4,000 cookies.
4,000 cookies.
It just they bake for weeks ahead and freeze 4,000 cookies.
Well, even after my mother wasn't part of the restaurant anymore, one of the things we gave our clients from my company was
Yep.
4 dozen cookies in a beautiful box and a handmade candy cane, and it was a really
that
pretty
she baked in her
that
condo.
she baked. And so we gave 100 boxes away, each containing 4 dozen. So she made 4 dozen at the age, I don't know, she was probably what, 86, 87,
And this was
88?
in her condo kitchen.
Yeah. How many elements she burned out in that little stove?
She never quit baking either. She went to she was always going outside, and she kept falling down and rolled down the hill one time, and a kid come by on a scooter and saw her laying there and whatnot. And that was it. We had to get her into some kind of housing that where she was safe. She didn't want to go, but we didn't even let her go back home. We took her down to Twin Rivers and said, can you take her? Yeah, but it takes weeks to get. No, Nancy said no.
Today.
We're leaving her today. Well, we've got this unit that we have put guests in, and she can stay there until we get the paperwork processed.
Yeah.
Okay. So she continued to bake and be active there for quite a number of years. And as time went along, she began to lose a little bit of her sharpness. And they came to recognize that when she put a hot dish in the oven, but she had it in Tupperware. So of course the Tupperware
Yeah.
melted it, smoked up the whole
Turn on
thing,
the
and said,
alarm.
okay, that's it, we're unplugging the stove, and they did that. Well, then she had a coffee maker, just a brew pot. Then she started making her grilled cheese on the hot plate on the coffee pot.
This is just a plain old coffee pot, you know, a drip pot.
Yeah.
So she never quit cooking.
No.
They
you
couldn't-
don't. That's what.
they-
That was what she was about.
In memory care, the only food that she had, I remember Nancy brought her these candies, orange slices, and chips, I think were the two things. Well, somehow, it must have been with a fingernail file, something. She would chop up those orange candies, and I'd find them everywhere when I'd go to clean or organize things. And I thought, oh my gosh, she can't stop chopping and cooking.
We can stay visiting, but I'm going to let
You
these
gotta
guys
let these
go.
guys go.
I want to
Yeah,
thank
we're
Channel
done.
12. We have Luke and Sam here off camera, and they've been dutiful in filming this. This will be shown on cable, Channel 12 in Cannon Falls. But eventually then you can go online, both to the City of Cannon Falls, Channel 12. It'll be on the museum website, cannonfallsmuseum.org, under Our Stories. That's what we label these. They actually are available on YouTube if you were just to go onto YouTube, and I think this one might be Cannon Falls Our Stories Edgewood Restaurant.
Okay.
Might be how it's on there. And so thank you for watching, everybody, and wait for the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye.